Welcome back to our channel, your premier destination for the deepest dives into the dramatic heart of Genoa City. Today is a beautiful, crisp day to unravel the tangled webs of deception, heartbreak, and power that continuously define our favorite families. Grab a cup of coffee and settle into your favorite chair because the stakes have never been higher and the psychological warfare currently gripping the city is reaching an absolute, explosive boiling point. The suffocating weight of impending doom hangs heavily over Diane Jenkins Abbott as she paces the expansive floor of her luxurious suite. The walls of her hard-won achievements, her status as the Abbott matriarch, and her corporate victories suddenly feel as though they are closing in on her. Driven by a frantic need for reassurance, she leaves a breathless, trembling voicemail for Jack Abbott, her voice laced with a potent mixture of fragile pride and undeniable desperation. She practically begs for him to return home so they can clear the toxic air between them, hoping to solidify their fractured future and discuss their next strategic moves. However, the exhaustion of her escalating paranoia eventually drags her into an uneasy, restless sleep, leaving her vulnerable to the darkest corners of her own subconscious. As Diane drifts into slumber, her mind unleashes a terrifyingly vivid nightmare that perfectly encapsulates her deepest, most paralyzing fears. The dreamscape materializes within the grand halls of the Abbott mansion, a place that usually serves as the ultimate symbol of her triumph and security. Yet, in this twisted nocturnal reality, the mansion has been entirely usurped. Patty Williams stands in the center of the living room, no longer the broken, institutionalized woman of the past, but radiating the confident, triumphant aura of the reigning lady of the house. The atmosphere is thick with an unbearable psychological dread as Diane is forced to witness her worst nightmare unfolding in real time. The true horror of the dream strikes when Patty, wearing a cruel and gloating smile, casually shatters the foundational reality of the Abbott family. In this nightmare, Patty reveals that the tragic miscarriage she suffered decades ago was a complete fabrication, triumphantly declaring that her long-lost daughter with Jack has survived and is thriving. Patty's voice echoes with malicious delight as she paints a sickeningly perfect picture of a joyous family reunion, a reunion that entirely erases Diane and her son, Kyle, from the Abbott legacy. Patty condescendingly offers Diane a brief, humiliating moment to meet the newly discovered Abbott heir before officially banishing her from the premises. The final, devastating blow in Diane's nightmare comes not from Patty, but from Jack himself. Standing beside the woman who has historically brought him so much pain, Jack's face is an impenetrable mask of cold, unfeeling detachment. Without a shred of the love or loyalty he once promised Diane, he delivers a final, dismissive farewell, effectively discarding her like a relic of a forgotten past. Diane jolts awake, drenched in a cold sweat, her heart hammering violently against her ribs. The lingering terror of the dream solidifies into a dangerous, waking paranoia, confirming her absolute belief that Patty Williams is a lethal threat to her marriage, her sanity, and Kyle's rightful inheritance. Meanwhile, in the dimly lit, sophisticated corners of the society bar, a very real and incredibly dangerous alliance is being forged. Jack Abbott, a man pushed to the absolute edge of his emotional endurance, sits across from Patty Williams. Jack is operating from a place of profound betrayal and simmering rage, his usual moral compass temporarily shattered by the relentless attacks on his family and his own psyche. He meticulously and coldly corners Patty, determined to extract the unvarnished truth about the catastrophic events that transpired on Victor Newman's yacht. Jack's eyes are devoid of their usual warmth, replaced by calculating intensity as he interrogates the woman who represents both his deepest historical trauma and his current weapon of choice. Under Jack's relentless pressure, Patty finally concedes to the ugly truth of her involvement. She freely admits that Victor Newman orchestrated and financed her presence on the yacht, utilizing her deeply rooted obsession with Jack as a pawn in his grand corporate and personal warfare. However, Patty's twisted perception of reality bleeds through her confession. She insists that while she accepted Victor's money, she would have orchestrated the encounter for free, driven by what she genuinely believes is a profound, cosmic emotional connection between her and Jack. She vehemently denies slipping the drugs into Jack's drink, logically pointing the finger at Victor's ruthless machinations. Yet she continues to romanticize the deeply violating event as a manifestation of their destined love. Swallowing his visceral revulsion, Jack makes the conscious, dark decision to weaponize Patty's delusions for his own vindictive purposes. Convinced that his marriage to Diane might be irreparably broken, Jack is consumed by a singular, burning desire for retribution against the man who orchestrated his downfall. He proposes a dangerous, Faustian bargain to Patty if she agrees to help him systematically dismantle Victor's life and permanently destroy Victor's marriage to Nikki Newman. Jack will allow her to remain in his orbit, When Patty questions what she stands to gain from this treacherous alliance, Jack dangles the ultimate toxic bait, suggesting that her loyalty and assistance might compel him to view her in an entirely new, potentially affectionate light. It is a masterclass in psychological manipulation, highlighting Jack's tragic descent into the very darkness he usually despises. Across town, a completely different game of survival and manipulation is unfolding within the opulent walls of the Genoa City Athletic Club. Phyllis Summers, operating on pure, unadulterated desperation and cunning survival instinct, has successfully smuggled the amnesiac Matt Clark into a luxurious suite. By securing the room under her own name, Phyllis ensures she maintains absolute, untethered control over his existence and his movements. Matt, a man whose historical legacy in Genoa City is painted with the blood and severe trauma of the Newman family, is currently existing as a vulnerable blank slate. He expresses a genuine, disarming desire to wander the city streets, hoping that exploring the town might trigger his lost memories and allow him to make amends for the sins he senses he has committed. Phyllis, recognizing the catastrophic danger of letting Matt out of her sight, vehemently and expertly shuts down his request for freedom. She spins a masterful web of deceptive protection, painting herself as his sole ally in a city filled with ruthless predators. She explicitly names the Newman family as the primary threat, describing them as powerful, vindictive monsters who are hunting him down without cause or mercy. By feeding him these calculated lies, Phyllis successfully isolates Matt, convincing him that stepping outside the suite would mean certain death or imprisonment. She promises to return the following morning for a shared breakfast, effectively locking the most dangerous, volatile man in town inside a gilded, luxurious cage. Once the heavy door clicks shut, leaving Matt entirely alone in the suffocating silence of the suite, the reality of his fractured mind begins to take a severe toll. He slowly reaches up, his fingers brushing against the tender, healing wound on his head, a physical manifestation of his missing past. The tactile sensation suddenly triggers a violent, unprompted flash of memory that assaults his consciousness. In a terrifying, fragmented vision, he sees the furious, contorted face of Nick Newman lunging at him in a brutal, unhinged attack. The memory is devoid of context but overflowing with visceral aggression. Matt is left, gasping for air, profoundly disoriented, and desperate to understand the identity of this violent man named Nick, and why his own brain is fiercely shielding him from the horrifying truth of his own identity. As Phyllis descends the grand, sweeping staircase of the athletic club, her mind is racing a mile a minute, calculating the immense value of the human leverage she now possesses. Fate intervenes as she serendipitously crosses paths with her longtime confidant and brilliant legal strategist, Michael Baldwin. Dropping her usual facade of impenetrable defiance, Phyllis casually admits to Michael that the relentless pressure has finally broken her, and she is fully prepared to negotiate a formal surrender with Victor Newman to avoid federal prison. However, the entire legal and strategic landscape violently shifts beneath their feet when Michael uncovers the staggering, unbelievable truth. Phyllis is secretly harboring Matt Clark. Michael, possessing a pragmatic and ruthlessly brilliant legal mind, instantly recognizes the sheer magnitude of this revelation. Matt Clark is not just a man, he is the ultimate ghost that haunts the Newman family, a bargaining chip of unimaginable power. Realizing that Phyllis has unknowingly secured the golden ticket to her own salvation, Michael immediately insists on taking the absolute reins of this perilous negotiation. The strategic posture shifts instantaneously from defense to aggressive offense. Together, they set their course directly toward the lion's den, driving toward the Newman ranch fully aware that they are about to engage in a high-stakes game of extortion with a patriarch who famously destroys his enemies for mere sport. Within the imposing, heavily guarded walls of the Newman ranch, a deeply emotional, volatile, and highly unusual confrontation is unfolding between Victor and his son, Nick. The patriarch has uncovered the harrowing details of Nick's premeditated, cold-blooded plot to utilize the corrupt detective bureau to execute Matt Clark. Victor, radiating an aura of absolute, terrifying authority mixed with fierce protective instinct, unequivocally forbids the murder plot from proceeding. He astutely points out the devastating reality that Nick's mind is currently severely compromised by the insidious, chemical grip of his escalating fentanyl addiction, rendering him completely incapable of rational thought, let alone surviving the catastrophic legal fallout of a murder charge. Stripped of his meticulously crafted vengeance and overwhelmed by the agonizing physical and mental demands of his addiction, Nick completely and utterly breaks down. The traditionally strong, fiercely independent Newman heir crumbles under the suffocating weight of his perceived failures. He expresses a profound, agonizing helplessness, weeping openly as he confesses the crushing guilt of disappointing his family, failing to protect his loved ones, and losing himself to the pills. In a rare, transcendent moment of paternal vulnerability that strips away decades of corporate ruthlessness, Victor drops his tyrannical armor. He steps forward and envelops his broken, trembling son in a fierce, grounding embrace, silently absorbing Nick's pain and promising to carry the burden of his demons. This fragile, emotionally raw moment of familial healing is abruptly and violently shattered by the unannounced arrival of Phyllis and Michael. The atmosphere in the grand living room instantly drops to freezing temperatures as the bitter adversaries face off across the expensive rugs. Michael, ever the calculated and composed negotiator, bypasses all traditional pleasantries and directly questions Victor on the exact, quantifiable value he places on neutralizing the threat of Matt Clark. Phyllis, entirely unable to contain her triumphant, venomous arrogance, steps forward and gloats with unrestrained glee about holding the Newman family's greatest, most terrifying nightmare securely in her exclusive grasp. Phyllis confidently lays her audacious, extortionate demands on the mahogany table. She dictates that Victor must utilize his immense political and financial influence to force District Attorney Christine Blair Romalotti to completely drop all fabricated corporate charges against her. In exchange for her absolute legal freedom and the preservation of her reputation, she will hand over the location of Matt Clark. Victor Newman, however, is a man whose entire legacy is built on never negotiating from a position of perceived weakness. His eyes narrow with lethal, calculating intent as he counters her extortion with an uncompromising, devastating ultimatum of his own. He demands the absolute, unconditional surrender of Newman Enterprises back into his control, framing his demand as a definitive, non-negotiable choice. She can either accept his terms to save her freedom or reject them and face total, inescapable annihilation. Watching these titans of Genoa City continuously tear each other apart, exploiting every vulnerability and trauma for leverage, evokes a profound sense of tragic inevitability. There is a deeply unsettling, almost palpable sorrow in witnessing characters like Jack and Nickman who have historically strived for nobility and honor being dragged into the murky, suffocating depths of manipulation and severe addiction by the sheer gravitational pull of their unhealed wounds. My heart genuinely aches for Nick, whose agonizing descent into opioid dependency serves as a stark, heartbreaking reminder that even the strongest, most fortified facades can crumble violently under the weight of unresolved pain. Similarly, observing Phyllis's relentless, almost pathological need for survival at the expense of her own soul is both mesmerizing and deeply tragic to chronicle. As a longtime observer of this intricate, ruthless human chessboard, one cannot help but feel a genuine, heavy grief for the collateral damage left in their wake. Recognizing that in their endless quest for absolute power and vengeance, everyone ultimately loses a vital piece of their humanity. With Victor's chilling, uncompromising ultimatum hanging heavily in the tense air of the Newman Ranch, the ultimate, life-altering decision rests entirely on Phyllis's trembling shoulders. Will she swallow her immense pride and sacrifice her hard-won corporate empire to secure her freedom, or will her insatiable arrogance push her to call the bluff of the most dangerous, unforgiving man in Genoa City? The clock is rapidly ticking. The explosive, violent secrets of the past are desperately clawing their way to the surface, and the very next move on this board will inevitably leave someone's life in absolute, unrecoverable ruins.